I would like to draw as much distance from between myself and the origin of IOPS as possible over time. But there's no point in denying that it did start here. So I can answer that question. And honestly, it was sort of like this. I think I said this yesterday at the book event. I sort of felt after a certain point in time, not only did I want to be part of an organization that I saw lasting right up through the winning of a new society and contributing to that process. In other words, I wanted that to happen in my lifetime. I wanted to get to the point where I could say to myself, that's going to contribute, that's going to be there all the way through. But I wanted Noam to be able to, it's hard for me to talk about this, I wanted Noam to be able to enjoy that. And that was part of the impetus at a particular moment in time, right, as compared to any other moment in time. It's a strange, I'm being honest with you. But the general motivation is obvious. You can't change society. You can't introduce a whole new social system person by person, individual by individual, or even little group by little group. You need the coherence. We need the coherence. We need the amalgamation of energies, the learning and sharing of lessons that comes from organization. So that was the impetus, and it goes all the way back to, some of you may be familiar with, we did a thing called Life After Capitalism at the World Social Forum. Then we did something called Reimagining Society. Then we did some polls. And we basically, what were we doing? We were feeling out, is there enough support for alignment with the kinds of politics that we feel such an organization needs to have if it's really going to lead to the kind of future that we want, to sustain such an organization. Now, I don't know that there is, but I began to feel like maybe there was, that something was slowly happening over time. Some of the things have been largely are evident. Others are not as clear, but it began to feel to me like there was, and so we tried. When we did the poll, the results were incredible. And they tell you something very profound about what the possible future is for us. So we did a poll on Zenith. 4,000 people responded. The poll was basically, if you go back and you look at it, the IOPS commitments. In other words, it was basically saying, and they emerged from Reimagining Society and Life After Capitalism, so it's been around for a while. And the poll was basically, if an organization formed, and it was defined in the way that IOPS is defined, this was before the fact, and then the poll choices were, would you join right away? Would you like the idea and maybe join, but wait and see whether others joined first? Would you be neutral, not give a damn, and go on about your business? Would you not join, but not be too antagonistic, and would you try your damnedest to crush it, right? And so we asked that, and we honestly thought that the results would be a sort of a bell curve. That's what usually you see, right around, with the middle being the most, and we'd see on both sides. What we had as a answer instead was that over 95% were in the first two. It was nothing. It was, everybody was in, I would join immediately or I would join later if other people joined. Well, this was the push. This was the thing that pushed us over the bump. Now there's a problem. It's a lie. That is to say, there's 3,000 people in it now. There should have been 4,000 people in it in 2 days. And there weren't. And figuring out why the same person would say yes to the poll and later run for the hills is probably the central task of figuring out how to grow this organization, right? Because that isn't even people who disagree. That's people who agree. And right now there are tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people who put into a room and having a calm discussion would say at the end of a description of IOPS and its commitments and its values and its vision, yeah, that's the best politics I've heard. I like that. Right? But getting them to actually join, that's the problem. Okay, so then that's where IOPS came from. Anybody else? Now you see I'm willing to answer anything that you might want to ask about this. So. Nobody has any questions? So again, in the beginning, we were sort of confronted with a conundrum. The natural inclination of people like ourselves is to want the thing to come about bottom up. So in other words, the scenario that you would sort of like to see happen, the one that I would certainly like to see happen, is that people in London form a chapter of people in London form an organization, people in New York form an organization, people in Paris form an organization, not even together, but they have a lot in common, and so 50 or 100 of these things form, and thousands of people are involved, and then they federate. Right? So that in essence, the local chapters come first, the national branches come second, and the international comes third. And there's never any issue about the international until there are these strong local chapters which have their own trust and relationships and decision-making mechanisms, and then you establish the international. Well, the problem was it wasn't happening. And the assessment was it wasn't going to happen. And the reason, I mean, maybe that's wrong, but that was our assessment. And the reason we felt that was because we felt it's too hard. The people working in isolation get crushed before they can make progress. Crushed by what? By doubt, literally. By misgivings, by feelings, it's just not going to pan out, so it's not worth my time, right? It's, in other words, an atrophy of energy. And what we felt was that the only way to overcome that was to perhaps, who knows if we can yet, but perhaps have the momentum of knowing that it's happening elsewhere, and that what you're doing is a part of something larger, and will merge into something larger, and will benefit from something larger, and that would provide the energy, the hope that would sustain the local efforts long enough so that they were established and functional. On the other hand, we didn't want to establish this larger thing and have it, and a relatively small number of people who would be establishing it, impose a definition on everything else. So that was the contradiction. How can you have something that gives hope and that's big, but doesn't impose from the top down? That's not a common thing. But that was the goal. And so what we came up with was something sort of like this. All right, let's figure out the broad commitments that we could have for that larger thing, which we believe that all the smaller local things, if they arose spontaneously, would have. And that's what the commitments and so on, the defining attachments are. And then we sort of felt, now with that in hand, and with that being the basis for joining, how do we eliminate the top-down dynamic? Answer, don't have decisions. This is not my favorite answer to questions, right? How do you avoid bad? Don't do it. Most of the time I think that's a big mistake. But in this case, I think it made some sense. I shouldn't, week one, I decide everything for everybody. Not very good. Week two, 10 people decide everything for everybody. Not any better, right? Week three, and so on and so forth. And even 3,000 people, I just don't feel it's enough. So the idea was, let's form it, let's have it be an interim thing, let's have no decisions that could possibly be controversial. Okay, who decides that? Me? No, that's not good enough. So we put together a committee of 50 people, an ICC. So it's people from all over the place. And the idea was, if a decision possibility arises, run it past the 50 people. If the 50 people have no opposition to it, if there's no controversy, it's a pretty safe bet that a vote of everybody, and including everybody to come, would be overwhelmingly for this decision. That's why there's only been 2 or 3 decisions. We don't run anything past the ICC. Nobody proposes anything that's going to be remotely controversial. That's why there's no program. Right? We're not choosing between, okay, let's do a full employment program, or let's do this program or that program, over which there should be controversy. All right, and there should be a decision, and there should be a minority, and so on and so forth. Don't want that yet because we don't have the means to do that in a way that's consistent with our self-management values. So that was the logic of the structure. The structure was you have to have local chapters, and you have to have national branches, and you have to have an international, partly for momentum, the international, partly for real face-to-face activity and organizing, the locals. You have to have self-managed decision-making, which you can't have until you have a representative, size of people. You have to have at least enough people so that it makes some sense, so that there's enough diversity, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the logic, and that's what we've been following. It's been somewhat hard. There are a lot of people who, they I'm an anarchist, let's decide everything now while my vote counts more than anybody else's. And you have to think a little bit about things. That was the approach. Now, whether it's the best approach or not, I don't know, but it is the trajectory that we've been on. And the notion was, okay, at some point you have a convention, and when you have a convention, now you're an organization, and you have formal, agreements that people have collectively agreed to and have talked about and have worked through, and then you function. Yeah.
It's quite waiting to it's big enough to be representative. What sort of figure would you be thinking?
It's many things are incredibly important and incredibly vague. There is no right answer, right? So that's one of the things that would have to be discussed, and there was some discussion of it, although it stopped quickly. I'm not sure why, although I will hazard a guess in a minute. Some people would say, okay, we should have 10,000 people and 100 chapters, and then a convention. Somebody else might say, well, 5,000 is enough, and 50 chapters. Somebody may say more. So I don't know. To me, when we were starting, I thought 10,000, and a whole bunch of chapters, working, capable chapters, which would provide models to others of how to do it, was sensible for a convention. Now I'm not sure. I honestly feel that there really is only one issue in IOPS. Now, a lot of people disagree with me about this, but I think there is one issue, and that's recruiting. In other words, I think that everybody is doing everything they can to do anything they can other than recruit other people. And it's because people are afraid to recruit. Not everybody, of course some people are doing it, but basically the task is to grow at a certain point of time. When you start the anti-war movement in 1964, you're not trying to levitate the Pentagon. You're trying to reach two people. And yet it's the most important moment of the development of the anti-war movement. When you start the civil rights movement, well, we're starting something, an organization. And it's the most important moment, in a sense. You either get past this moment or you don't. If you do, you're on the road to something, and maybe it's inexorable. But if you don't, you're dead. And what's the difference between those two things? It isn't smart thinking. It's two things: growing in number and growing in commitment. So it's growing in number means you have to reach out to people. Growing in commitment means the people who are in it have to become more committed, which means that the organization has to cause them to feel tight ties. So there has to be relations among people. People have to be becoming friends, literally. People have to be sharing lessons. People have to be becoming better at things. If somebody is not able to do this, to sit up and talk, fine, learn how. Alone? No. In concert with others. Right? This is the kind of thing that we have to become good at. Look, what distinguishes the people who are very, very visible on the left from others? Well, in the rare case, it's some sort of genetic anomaly. So that's Chomsky. Okay? So well, really, some things are, that's it, but he also works his butt off, right? And that's really what distinguishes, right? So there are the occasional weirdnesses, but mostly it's hard work. And so mostly that's the issue. Now, mostly hard work can be insane. That is to say, the people who put out that hard work put it out at a time when it seems unlikely to accomplish anything and when it doesn't yield much in the way of smiles, right? And sometimes some of us just have to do that. But it helps to create an environment, a group of people with whom you can relate, so that when you put out that hard work, it receives some gratification, and you get back. And when you acknowledge that you don't know how to do something, right? Something that most people on the left can't even begin to do because their egos are so caught up in having no flaws that the idea of acknowledging inadequacy is just impossible. But if you can't acknowledge inadequacy, you can't get any better. This stuff might sound like platitudes, but this is what matters. Not how does the IMF, to the fourth decimal point operate. Who gives a fuck? Capitalism sucks. The place where our mental energy needs to be going is, how do we get you to be more committed and to stay longer? That's what has to do with winning. The other has to do with theory in a classroom. That's about winning. That's about building a movement that matters. And that's the kind of issue that needs to be forefront in something like IOPS, which is concerned about really winning a better world as compared to being concerned about looking smart. Yeah.
Michael, I was delighted to read in the IOPS program this phrase that the organization works to substantially improve the life situation of its members.
Yeah.
It's very rare in any leftist or progressive organization. We are aiming to the big picture, the future, but how we take care of ourselves and of each other, that's outside the political discourse. So it was delightful to say this. And I have a question, because when I hear you speaking, that 4,000 people said yes to the poll and then they didn't sign up, and how to get them back. That's the problem. When you say that the growing in number and growing in commitment. So I have a question about this this way of thinking. That to me it's like a very classic leftist position, in a sense of the big issue is how can we mobilize the masses, or even earlier left, of which I was part of in the radical edge in the 60s, that how can we awaken the class consciousness in the working class. And so it's like dropping the consciousness, the intention from outside, from the activist bubble into the masses, and so the idea of getting people mobilized, I think that the truth is that people don't like to be mobilized any more than they like to be managed. What they want to hear, what they want to experience, is being inspired, being touched and inspired by the movement. And that's what brought me to this meeting today, the hope that this can be an organization that goes beyond the numbers, that we have to build the organization. I think that once we start embodying this part of the program to improve the life situation of the people, and also a little bit beyond that to create positive working prototypes of the future in terms of prefigurative politics, then it will become an attractive force. Then we don't have to recruit people, they will come.
I certainly agree with you. But I don't think it's either or. So, there's so much to say about this, other than that, I could ramble on forever, and it's probably not very functional. But let me just give one or two examples. The bad example. In 1968, people used to like to say, Ho Chi Minh is very admirable. Ho Chi Minh stays up way late at night and works way late at night because everybody else is asleep and he can get a lot done. The next person gets up and says, Mao Zedong, and it's true, right? Mao Zedong, except I might have him backwards. Mao Zedong is very admirable. He gets up really early in the morning, and he works really early in the morning for a long time because nobody's around and he gets a lot done. But we're Americans, so we have to emulate both Ho and Mao. So we will go to bed really, really late and get up really, really early, and we'll work all night long. And of course, the impetus, I hope you see the insanity, the impetus of the thing is to contribute, to do something positive. The reality is suicide, right? The reality is burnout. And that's what people do. They lose track of the fact that we are people too, and that we have to be fulfilled, and we have to exude positive energy instead of constant irritation and annoyance, etc., etc. The reason why the 4,000 people aren't here is the same as the reason why is the paramount question for the left in the last decade. Why, before the war in Iraq, did 12 million demonstrate? And then, after, while the war is happening, years later, 100,000 or 200,000 demonstrate. There is no bigger question for the left. Right? How can that not be the power? I mean, how can you possibly have, before the war, the largest anti-war demonstrations in history before it even happened? Nothing like that during the 60s. Right? That's incredible. And then, years later, fewer and fewer and fewer, even though the war is there and the pain and suffering are happening. That's incredible. That's because the movement is such a hostile, obnoxious place to be. It's so bad, it is so debilitating, it is so draining, it is so productive of bad vibes in people, it is so degrading to people. Now maybe I'm exaggerating a little, but not much, that people leave. People leave. So you're right, it can't be those things. And I think that the reason why most of those 4,000 people didn't join isn't because they changed their mind about the commitments and the values and anything else. It's because they faced the reality. If I join, I'll have to go to meetings. I'll have to be around other people of this ilk. I don't need it. I don't want it. And it wasn't a conscious choice because that would be sort of embarrassing and depressing. It was just a sort of a, you know what I'm saying? I suspect that's it. So we do have to deal with that, but there's a side of this that also can be dangerous. So it's the side that says, well, the most important thing is our own well-being, and therefore we don't do anything that's not fun, right? Now, I know you're not saying that, but that is a real trajectory, right? And that's not good either. Look, the truth is that winning a new society is not all going to be fun. It is not all going to be things that we would do otherwise. Has anybody ever heard of socialist basketball? Of course not. Okay, socialist basketball is something we used to play in the 60s. It goes like this. You have two basketball teams, but it's not capitalistic basketball, it's socialist basketball. So what does that mean? It means your role is to play in such a way as to bring out the best in the person who you're defending, right? So in other words, if you and I are there and you're really good and you're defending me and you could swat it, and, you don't do that. You play exactly in the way to get the best out of me. And of course the score doesn't matter, right? So that's very nice, very humane, and it involves great skill. It's not as if you can't do, But if you play socialist basketball with capitalists, they kill you. You can't do it. You cannot do it. So that's our problem. In a period when we're trying to change the world against thugs, we can't only do things that are what we would like to be doing in a new world. And so we have to do the things that we wouldn't like to be doing, and we have to keep our heads about ourselves when we do it. And keep it uplifting and keep it developing. These are issues, I assume people don't talk about this stuff, but these are the issues that we have to solve. Sectarianism, we have to solve that. That's what makes our movement small. It's because our movements become only those people who can endure an environment of fundamentalist, sectarian nonsense. Everybody else slowly goes away. And the sad thing is that then you're left with psychotic people like me, right? People who can endure that for 30 or 40 years. I must be nuts. Right? It is not a stupid choice to leave. People are not dumb and immoral because they don't put up with it.
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned about this unelected committee. You talk about, you justify it, or try to justify it in terms of it not deliberately not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think either it's not got any decisions to make, in which case I think it shouldn't exist, or it's got decisions to make, in which case I think it should be elected.
But it's not really, well, look at the decisions that it made. I'm going to have trouble even remembering what they are. One was to, I can't even remember what they are. Maybe somebody here remembers. I think there were 2 or 3 decisions.
For the name of the organization, I think.
No, that was prior.
Okay.
Oh, no, that was then.
Something about...
Right, but it's a temporary name. But yeah. But the trouble is, imagine what would go into, again, Just like I would rather see the whole thing start by spontaneous local organization finally federating, I would like to see something like what you described also. But imagine trying to do it. Imagine having an election that spans 100 countries, right? With, at what stage do you do it? When you have 50 people? When you have 100 people? So let's say we did it right now, when we have 3,000 people. So we have an election that spans 100 countries, 3,000 people doing the voting. For who? For anybody who wants to run? Okay. I mean, it's a lot of expenditure, of energy and focus and everything else to wind up with something that does nothing, or next to nothing. It does only what is uncontroversial. Now, I mean, I actually think you could pick 50 people randomly and it would be okay.
I would prefer that, to be honest.
Well,
we could easily have an election right now in this room. This is the intro event.
No, see, that's what I don't think we can do. That says the 50 people, the 100 people in this room have some special rights.
Better than the way you... How did you pick the UK representatives?
There is no UK representatives. There was a letter that went out to a lot of prominent people. A subsection of them said yes, because they had to like, they had to like IOPS too. So some said no. So then it was open. It was anybody who you all would like to add, you can add, no vote. In other words, if you tell, in the real world, if you tell those 50 people that they're going to have to vote on new people, they're all going to run for the hills. Because they don't want to engage in endless pursuit. Anyway, this was maybe it's wrong, but this was the reason. And so then we added new people. Then, this was one of the votes. One of the votes was that you can add new people if it's more women than men, but you can't add just a man. You understand what I'm saying? In other words, anybody could add somebody anybody on the ICC could add somebody to the ICC if it was a woman. You could add 2 women and 1 man, but you could not add more men than women and thus make the balance even worse. That was a vote to agree to that and then to implement it. Yeah, nobody in their right mind would, in other words, everybody said, of course. I don't think we've had a decision in 3 months or 4 months. Because there's nothing to decide. When will there be some stuff that matters? When we get to deciding on a convention.
So why does the committee exist?
For now, no reason. Probably a third of them don't even know they're on it. In other words, the continuing existence of it is basically irrelevant until another decision arises. A question that about the ICC that is more real would be, why don't they do anything? In other words, if I look down the list of names on I don't know why none of you would, if I look down the list of the names of the ICC, each of you probably know, I think there's 50, something like that, I don't know. I think there's 50. You probably know by name at least half, right? So you might think to yourself, of that half, I know 4 or 5 are doing stuff, why aren't the others? So how come those other 20 whose name I know, who are very prominent and who could do good things? Right? I don't mean make decisions, I mean write a piece that makes it visible, stuff like that. Why aren't they doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't think Mr. Pilger should be on the committee because he's not doing anything. That's another issue. I think I'm more concerned about the fact it's an unelected committee, and the fact it's not doing anything just makes me think it shouldn't exist, because it's quite off-putting to me that it exists and it might do something.
And that's perfectly reasonable. Different people will have different reactions. If you get rid of it completely, then somebody's going to say, well, who's doing all of it? The assumption is that it'll be a hidden group. So now it's an open group. They're widely respected, if not internationally, then in their own country. And they're not doing anything. And that's perfectly clearly stated, and everything they do know is clearly enunciated and made clear. And that's the way it is. Maybe it should have been done differently. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see really why you need to start off with, say, maybe a founding membership.
What membership?
Like something like the organisation, you've got the 300 people or whatever. Yeah. But eventually, I would like to see that once the chapters are set up, it would be led from below.
Of course.
So at the moment you need somebody to organise it. So you've got a founding maybe membership to understand of you know, it may just be people there who are giving direction, do you understand? But eventually, as chapters are set up...
But it's already, let's be clear, there is no group that is giving it direction. The only direction is in the initial commitments and stuff that people have agreed to. Nothing has been added. So nobody is sort of changing the definition or adding anything or anything like that. It has to come from below. It has to come from the chapters. And that's why I say, let me put it this way. If the London chapter had 400 people in it, right, instead of, I don't know what it has, and the UK had 3,000 or 5,000 people in it, then the UK would be establishing everything that's going to go on.
Yeah, and if there's
But it doesn't.
Yeah, and if there's any international convention, we can then say...
You'd be the biggest.
Yeah, we would say maybe we want 2 or 3 people on that.
Yeah, I mean, there might not be any need for any kind of committee.
It may be more autonomy.
There is no assumption that this thing continues. In fact, it's described as melting away and everybody on it being nothing but a member. Right? And nobody on it expects to be anything but that. See, this is a group of people, none of whom, right, want to have increasing power. They don't. I mean, that's part of what the condition was. It's not a group of people who want to run the show. It just isn't. Whatever that mouth movement is, I certainly can't hear it. You want to stop?
Yes.
Okay.